Saturday morning, the Experts program kicks off right here on Power Talk Radio, 1460 and 101 FM. And Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, is going to get us started. Hello, Luis.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Doing really well. We are sitting here on the 15th of April. Wow. That's amazing. We're getting so far into the year. And it looks like we're finally getting some decent weather. I think we're done with the rain.
Yeah, now the wind is what we have to worry about. Let's see that thing dies down. Because it's interfering with my sailing.
Yeah, you were telling me last Wednesday night that they had to cancel the beer can races, right?
Yeah. It was just too rough and windy out there. And the wind itself was holding steady at about 15 to 17 knots, but it was those gusts of 30 that no boat ever wants to encounter when you're trying to raise a spinnaker.
Now, have you ever been out in the weather when it's been like gust of 30 in your boat, and what does it feel like?
Yeah, I've actually been out there, and not intentionally. It just kind of came up, and it's uncomfortable because most boats, unless they're big, really aren't set to handle that kind of weather, especially in a bay where there's a lot of choppy water or big swells. You end up reefing, which means you keep the sail small as possible so that it doesn't overpower the boat, because the last thing you want is, to heave to or have the boat kind of crash down on you. So you keep the sail small and you sail very carefully back to the dock as soon as possible.
The sea is just the most tremendously powerful force of all of our natural forces. And when you're out there on the ocean, a little boat, even a large ship, is like a cork in the water if you get into really rough seas. I was reading a story about an ocean liner making a transatlantic voyage during the winter many, many years ago, I think back in the early 60s. And it's the North Atlantic in the winter, which is the most inhospitable of all the oceans. But they were in a storm with force 10 seas. And
amazing.
From the keel to the top of the smokestack is like 200 feet, right? Or 175 feet. And they experienced water coming down the funnel into the engine room because they had waves breaking over that high. Ship falls into a trough and a big wave comes over and hits the ship and hits the funnels, and you've got salt water coming down through the exhaust vents into the engine room. That had to be pretty scary for the guys down there.
That sounds frightening.
Man, the ocean is nothing to mess with.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Hey, we've got an interesting story here. The FBI is warning against using public phone charging stations. Now, I noticed that in airports now, in the waiting areas, there are tables, and then there are those ubiquitous airport chairs that are all strung together with that fabric material or, the vinyl that you sit on. And a number of them have had charging stations added. They've got like a junction box with a couple of 110 outlets, and then alongside that, you have a couple of USB, charging ports. Is this what they're talking about being a danger to use, and why so?
It is. Yeah. So what's happened is this term called juice jacking, and it takes advantage of the fact that a lot of people, when they see these USB charging ports, rather than taking out their own charger, their own, plug to plug it into a regular 110 outlet, they say, I'll just plug my USB cable into this USB slot, and then I can just power my phone. No fuss, no muss, no bother. But the problem is that the bad guys have figured out that they can tap into those USB ports and load it full of malware and other bad things that can infect your phone as soon as you plug them into these ports. So the FBI is saying, look, don't use those public USB charging ports unless you know that it's safe. And most of us, when we're traveling and are at an airport or some public place, chances are that we don't know those things are safe. So instead, just use your own plug and, plug in your power supply into a 110 port and then plug your USB cable into that and make sure that you're safe.
And how are they loading the malware into these USB charging ports?
Well, the charging ports really are just dumb devices. So they're designed to just provide trickle power to the phone, but they also are smart in the sense that they have to be able to detect when something's plugged in so they can provide power. So they have some intelligence built into them. And that's what these guys take advantage of, is these small chipsets that are part of the whole USB charging station. They can basically take a USB stick that they've loaded full of malware, plug it in there, and then that malware integrates into that software that's already on that charging station device and starts spewing it out when somebody else plugs in a regular USB cable into that. And it's just like people who do those credit card skimmers and things like that. They figure it out. They're not stupid people, and they figured out a way to infect these public US stations with malware that once it's infecting your phone, it basically dies files home to the mothership where the bad guys are waiting to get control of your phone and maybe extract information or just monitor what you're doing and eventually take over your phone.
So, for example, if someone was going to do this surreptitiously, they can even do this when the airport is busy. They just insert
absolutely.
the USB into it and wait for it to download, all the malware, and they know how long that's going to take, right? For 10 seconds, whatever it is, pull it out, and they've infected that. Then they do it to the next one, and so on and so forth. Now, is there any way that these USB charging ports can be redesigned so that the only thing that they do is trickle charge and they don't have any memory that'll store anything that's put into them?
And there's ways to make sure that those devices are secure enough so that they don't get infected. The question is, will they take out the ones that are already out there that are essentially dumb and re-engineer them with new ones? And they probably won't, at least not in the short term. They may incorporate it into future devices that they put out there, but at least for the time being, the ones that are already out there are just going to stay there.
Oh, so you're going to have to, I think it's going to have to be pressure that comes from travelers to the airports here on the Monterey Peninsula, right? They redo our terminal and we get these charging ports that we, the public, are going to say to airport management, look, we want you to make sure that these dumb devices are protected so that we can plug our USB cables in, charge our phones, and not worry about getting our information hijacked or what have you, because probably in a lot of respects, it's not practical to run a junction box to every seat, right, with 110.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but it's a lot easier to build those USB charging ports. You might have like one junction box to bring the power, and then you run like a piece of conduit all along the bottom of the seats, and then you have spokes that come off of each seat there and have a USB charging port under there, right? That's probably the way a lot of them would do it. But then, like you say, that's basically leaving it wide open for the criminal element.
And that's why the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, recently published regulations that's really pushing manufacturers to consider cybersecurity and things like this into their devices when they make them, so that it's not an afterthought or it's not something that we say, oops, we should have thought that, we should have put that in there in the first place. Right. So I think you're going to start seeing more secure devices be produced, and hopefully this problem will go away at some point.
All right. That's Luis Alvarez, CEO of the Alvarez Technology Group, joining us today here on Power Talk Radio. Online, alvareztg.com, @AlvarezTG. That's the Twitter handle. And Luis, the toll-free number for the I-Team.
And give us a call at 866-78-I-TEAM. That's 866-784-8326.